my fiancé declared. "I'm keeping my ex's last name after we get married. It carries more prestige than yours." I simply replied, "Okay." But behind the scenes, I canceled the wedding, secured a full refund, and moved out of the apartment the day before the ceremony. She came home to an empty apartment. Now she's begging me to come back. My name is Marcus. I am 32, and I work in commercial insurance. I live in a mid-sized city where most days follow the same rhythm: early gym, office by 8, dinner at home. I am structured. I track expenses, I plan ahead, and I do not make big emotional decisions without thinking them through. My fiancée is Lauren, 30, and she works in marketing for a regional healthcare group. We have been together just over 3 years. We have lived together for 1 year in a 2-bedroom apartment close to both our offices. We split bills evenly and keep a shared spreadsheet for rent and utilities. Our wedding was scheduled for next month, around 60 guests, mostly family. Deposits were paid and confirmations were coming in. Up until last week, I believed we were just ironing out small details. Lauren was married before. It ended quickly, about 2 years in. She kept her ex-husband's last name after the divorce. Early in our relationship, she explained it as a professional decision. Her certifications, client list, and LinkedIn were all under that name. I accepted it at the time because it felt temporary. We were not engaged yet, and I assumed once we married, it would resolve itself. Last week we were finalizing paperwork for the marriage license, and she mentioned, very casually, that she planned to keep her current last name even after we get married. I asked her to clarify. Not confrontational, just direct. If paperwork was not the issue anymore, what was the reasoning? She did not hesitate. She said her current last name carries more prestige than mine, that it sounds established, that mine is harder to pronounce and does not have the same weight professionally. She said it like she was explaining basic math. No apology. No awareness that what she was saying might land wrong. I looked at her and just said okay. She seemed satisfied with that response. She moved on to discussing seating arrangements as if nothing significant had just happened. I did not argue. I did not defend my name. I did not try to persuade her. But internally something shifted in a way that felt permanent. That night, after she went to bed, I stayed up at the kitchen table. I opened a blank note on my phone and started listing logistics, vendor contacts, lease terms, refund policies, because the issue was not really the last name. It was the way she evaluated me against another man and felt comfortable ranking me lower out loud. The next morning, I went to work like normal. I did not bring it up again before leaving. Lauren was still asleep when I left for the gym, and by the time I came back, she was on a call. From the outside, nothing had changed. But I do risk assessment for a living. When someone shows you how they measure value, you believe them. Around noon, she texted me about final dress alterations and asked if my parents had confirmed their hotel. It read like any other wedding week message. I responded politely. I did not want a dramatic scene. I wanted clarity. After work, I reviewed our lease agreement. We were both on it. Term ended in 3 months. Breaking it early required 60 days notice and a fee equal to 1 month's rent. Financially manageable. Then I checked vendor contracts. Venue deposit was partially refundable until 2 weeks before the event. We were still inside that window. Catering had a tiered refund policy based on guest count and timing. Photographer required cancellation in writing but offered credit. I was not acting impulsively. I was gathering information. That evening, Lauren was in a noticeably upbeat mood. She had dinner with 2 friends who were bridesmaids. When she came home, she mentioned that one of them joked about her keeping her current last name because it sounded more powerful. Lauren repeated the joke and laughed. I asked her directly, without sarcasm, whether she thought my last name would negatively affect her career. She shrugged and said it just does not have the same recognition. She added that she worked hard to build credibility and was not willing to downgrade professionally for tradition. Downgrade. Again, no anger. Just an evaluation. I did not argue the merits of my family name. I did not defend my parents or our background. That would have turned it into a debate about pride. This was not about pride. It was about partnership. If she genuinely believed attaching herself publicly to me was a downgrade, that is not something counseling fixes. That is worldview. That night she fell asleep quickly. I stayed up again. This time I moved from listing options to outlining steps. Step 1 was confirming exactly how much of the wedding budget could be recovered. Step 2 was figuring out where I would live if I left. Because for the first time since proposing, I was not thinking about the ceremony. I was thinking about exit strategy. I did not confront her again about the name. There was nothing left to clarify. She had already explained her reasoning twice, and both times it came down to hierarchy. Her ex-husband's name had weight. Mine did not. Instead, I shifted into logistics mode. The following day during lunch, I stepped outside and called the venue coordinator. I kept my voice neutral. I said there had been a change in circumstances and asked what cancellation would look like financially if I withdrew this week. She confirmed we were still within the partial refund window. We would lose a portion of the deposit, but the majority would be returned within 30 days. It was not insignificant money, but it was not catastrophic either. Next, I called the caterer. Similar structure. Tiered refund. If I canceled before final headcount submission, we would only forfeit a small administrative fee. The photographer was the least flexible, but offered to convert the deposit into a credit valid for 2 years. That detail stuck with me. 2 years felt like a different lifetime. That evening, Lauren was reviewing RSVP responses at the dining table. She looked excited. She mentioned how her boss had confirmed attendance and how good it would look professionally to host colleagues at a tasteful event. That phrasing stood out. I asked her one more question, carefully. I said, "After we are married, how do you plan to introduce us at work events?" As Mr. and Mrs. with different last names. She said, "Of course." She said it confidently, like it was progressive and obvious. Then she added that it would be clear she chose to retain the stronger name. She actually used the word stronger. I did not react outwardly, but internally, the framing was complete. This was not about convenience. It was about branding, and I was apparently not part of the brand she valued. That night, I transferred my portion of our shared savings into my personal account. It was not secret money. It was clearly defined in our spreadsheet as my contribution. I left her portion untouched. Then I emailed the venue to formally initiate cancellation. I slept better that night than I had in days. Not because I felt relief, but because the uncertainty was gone. Clarity is uncomfortable at first. Then it becomes practical. Once the venue confirmed cancellation in writing, I moved to the next layer. I drafted a short, neutral email to the caterer and photographer. No emotional explanation. Just a statement that the event would not proceed and I was invoking the cancellation terms outlined in the contract. I attached the signed agreements to avoid back and forth. By the end of the week, every vendor had acknowledged receipt. Financially, the loss was manageable. We would lose some deposits, but the majority of the larger payments were scheduled for the week of the wedding. I stopped those pending transfers immediately. Lauren had no idea. She was focused on dress fittings and seating charts. One night, she complained that my cousin had not responded to the RSVP yet and asked me to follow up. I told her I would handle it. I did not follow up. The apartment was the next issue. We were both on the lease, but practically speaking, most of the furniture was mine. I had purchased it before she moved in. I had receipts saved digitally. I spent an hour pulling those into a folder just in case it became relevant. I also called the leasing office and asked about transferring the lease fully to one tenant. They said it was possible with income verification and a processing fee. I did not give details. I just gathered information. That weekend, Lauren hosted her bridesmaids for brunch at our place. I stayed out of it and went to the gym longer than usual. When I came back, I overheard her telling them that keeping her current last name was a power move. She said women compromise too much and she was not about to shrink herself for a man's ego. That was the first time she framed me as ego-driven for even caring. I realized something important in that moment. She had already built a narrative where I would be the insecure one if I objected. That meant if I challenged her publicly, I would automatically lose credibility in her social circle. So I did not challenge her. Instead, on Monday morning, I scheduled a viewing for a short-term furnished rental across town. Month-to-month lease. Available immediately. I toured it during my lunch break. It was small but clean. Walking distance to my office. No shared history attached to it. That afternoon, I submitted the rental application. I was not reacting emotionally. I was closing accounts. The rental application was approved within 24 hours. My credit is solid and my income verification was straightforward. I signed the lease electronically and scheduled move-in for the day before our wedding. That date was intentional. I did not want a drawn-out conversation or weeks of tension in the apartment. I wanted one clean break that aligned with the logistical reality she had created. While Lauren was busy confirming hair appointments and finalizing the playlist, I began packing slowly. Not dramatically. Not with boxes stacked in the hallway. I started with off-season clothes and old files from my office closet. Things she would not notice immediately. I also scheduled movers. Small crew. 2-hour minimum. Early morning slot. Midweek, Lauren asked if I had updated my name on the draft wedding website. She wanted it to reflect how we would be introduced moving forward. She suggested listing us with different last names to normalize it for guests. I asked her, calmly, if she saw any issue with our future children potentially having my last name while she kept her ex-husband's. She rolled her eyes and said we were not even pregnant yet and that I was being dramatic. Then she added that kids could take whichever name made the most sense for their opportunities. Opportunities. That word again. I did not argue. I simply nodded. Internally, that was the final data point I needed. This was not a single comment taken out of context. This was a consistent value system. On Thursday, I went to the bank and opened a new checking account solely in my name for direct deposit. I updated my employer information that afternoon. No shared financial strings left unexamined. I also drafted a short email to our guest list. I did not send it yet. I saved it as a draft. The night before the move, Lauren was unusually affectionate. She said she was excited for our future and joked about how everyone would talk about how confident she was for keeping her name. I listened. I did not correct her perception. When she fell asleep, I looked around the apartment. Couch I bought. Dining table I assembled. Wall art from my old place. I did not feel anger. I felt finished. The movers arrived at 7 in the morning. Lauren had already left for a final nail appointment and brunch with her mother. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving and reminded me to confirm the rehearsal dinner head count. I told her I would take care of it. I had already taken care of it. I supervised the movers personally. I kept it efficient. Couch, table, bed frame, mattress, my desk, kitchen equipment I had purchased. I left anything she brought into the apartment and anything that was clearly shared but inexpensive. I was not interested in petty disputes. By 10:30 the apartment was almost empty. The rooms looked larger without furniture. Neutral. Temporary. I walked through each room once to make sure I had not forgotten anything important. Then I placed a folder on the kitchen counter. Inside were copies of the vendor cancellation confirmations, the lease transfer paperwork, and a simple letter. The letter was direct. I explained that I had canceled the wedding, secured the refunds available, and moved my belongings out. I stated that the leasing office had confirmed she could assume the apartment if she qualified alone, and that I had already removed my name from the renewal discussion. I clarified that I would cover my portion of rent through the end of the current month as agreed. No insults. No emotional accusations. Just facts. Before leaving, I sent the email to our guests. Short message. Due to unforeseen differences, the wedding would not be taking place. We appreciated their understanding. No elaboration. Then I blocked her number temporarily. Not as punishment. As control. I did not want the first wave of reaction to derail the plan. By noon, I was in the new rental signing the final move and checklist. It was quiet. Bare walls. No shared memories. Around 2 in the afternoon, I unblocked her number. Within seconds my phone began vibrating. Missed calls. Text messages. Voicemail stacking. The first text read, "Where are the couches?" The second read, "Why is the bed gone?" The third was longer and less controlled. By the fourth call, she had clearly read the letter. I let it ring. For the first time in weeks, I felt aligned with my decision. She valued prestige. I valued respect. Those are not interchangeable. I let the calls go to voicemail for about an hour. Not to be dramatic. I needed her to burn through the initial shock before we spoke. Raw panic is not productive. When I finally answered, she did not start by asking why. She started by demanding an explanation. Her tone was sharp, almost offended. She said I had embarrassed her, that guests were texting her, that her mother was confused and humiliated. She asked what kind of man cancels his own wedding without a discussion. I let her finish. Then I told her we had discussed it. Multiple times. I reminded her of the conversation about prestige, about stronger names, about not downgrading professionally. I explained that I cannot marry someone who publicly views association with me as a liability. She tried to pivot. She said I was overreacting, that it was just a name, that modern couples do this all the time. Then she added that real confidence would not be threatened by optics. I told her this was not about being threatened. It was about alignment. If she believes my identity lowers her value, marriage would magnify that imbalance, not fix it. There was a long silence. Then her tone changed. She asked where I was. I did not give the address. I told her I had secured separate housing and that my decision was final. She shifted again. Now it was practical concerns. What about the non-refundable deposits? What about the lease? What about explaining this to her colleagues? I told her I had handled the refunds within contractual limits, and that documentation was in the folder. I also reminded her that I would honor my share of rent through the end of the month. After that, the lease transfer was between her and management. She accused me of planning this secretly. That part was true. I told her planning privately was necessary because if I had announced my doubts, it would have turned into a debate about my ego instead of the underlying issue. Her voice cracked then. Not anger. Not sarcasm. Just realization. She asked if I would reconsider. I said no. Not loudly. Not emotionally. Just no. Because once respect becomes negotiable, it does not regenerate on its own. After that call, the messages shifted in tone. The first wave had been anger and accusations. The second wave was strategy. She sent long texts reframing the situation. She said she never meant that my name was inferior. She said I misunderstood what she meant by prestige. She claimed she was speaking purely from a branding standpoint and that it had nothing to do with how she valued me. The issue was that she had been very clear the first time. When someone explains themselves plainly, I take them at their word. I do not rewrite their statements to make them more comfortable later. She called again that evening. This time she sounded controlled, almost composed. She said we should meet in person and talk like adults. She suggested couples counseling. She mentioned how much time we had invested in the relationship. I told her I was open to a conversation for closure, but not for negotiation. That distinction irritated her. She said I was being rigid, that relationships require compromise. I asked her what compromise she had proposed. Keeping her ex-husband's last name was not a compromise. It was a unilateral decision framed as empowerment. She went quiet. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. She asked if there was someone else. There was not. I told her that clearly. This was not about another woman. It was about the woman I was about to marry and the hierarchy she openly believed in. Later that night, she sent a photo of the empty living room. Just the bare walls and her suitcase near the door. No caption. I did not respond. The next morning, I received a call from her mother. I let it go to voicemail. The message was measured but disappointed. She said weddings are stressful and pride should not ruin something beautiful. That word again. Pride. It is interesting how quickly self-respect gets relabeled when it becomes inconvenient for other people. By the end of the day, Lauren sent a final message that reads simply, "Please come home so we can fix this." I looked around my new place. Small kitchen. Neutral paint. Quiet. For the first time in weeks, there was no background tension. I typed back one sentence. There is nothing to fix. The days after that were quieter, but not silent. Lauren continued reaching out, just less aggressively. Instead of long arguments, she sent smaller messages. Practical things at first. Questions about mail forwarding. About splitting the remaining wedding refund checks. About whether I wanted any kitchen items I had left behind. I answered the logistical questions only. Short responses. No commentary. Then the tone shifted again. She sent a message late one night saying she had been thinking about what I said. That maybe she had been insensitive. That maybe she framed it poorly. She wrote that she never intended to rank me against her ex. That part stood out. I had never accused her of consciously ranking me. I said she revealed her value system. The fact that she defaulted to defending against a comparison told me she understood the implication all along. She asked if I would consider postponing instead of canceling. Just take time. Let emotions cool down. She said people make worse mistakes under stress. I replied the next morning. I told her this was not stress. It was clarity. Stress causes confusion. This felt precise. She responded with something more vulnerable. She admitted that after her divorce, she felt insecure professionally. That keeping her ex-husband's last name had felt like holding on to something stable. She said it had nothing to do with loving him. I believe that part is probably true. But stability built on another man's identity, then defended as superior to the man she was about to marry, is not a foundation I am willing to build on. That weekend she asked to meet in person one last time. Public place. Coffee shop near our old apartment. I agreed. She looked tired when I arrived. Not dramatic. Just worn down. She said she would change her name. She said it quickly, like pulling off a bandage. She said it did not matter as much as us staying together. I listened carefully. The problem was that now it sounded like a concession, not a belief. And I am not interested in being the fallback option that wins by ultimatum. I told her I appreciated her saying she would change her name, but that was not the point anymore. She looked frustrated. She said that was exactly the point. That she was willing to compromise. That relationships require adjustment. She kept using the word compromise like it automatically erased what had already been revealed. I explained it as clearly as I could. If she had originally said she felt attached to the name because it represented stability after a difficult divorce, we could have worked through that. If she had said she was afraid of losing professional continuity, we could have planned the transition carefully. But she did not say that. She said her ex-husband's last name carried more prestige than mine. She said mine was harder to pronounce. She described keeping his as a power move. She framed my discomfort as ego. Those are not stress slips. Those are value statements. She went quiet after that. Then she asked, "So that is it?" I said yes. Not because I am angry. Not because I want to punish her. But because marriage is not just about affection. It is about alignment and how you view each other publicly and privately. If I marry someone who sees me as a downgrade, even subconsciously, that belief will surface again. In career decisions. In social settings. In how future children are guided. I am not interested in constantly proving I am not a liability. We finished our coffee. No dramatic exit. No raised voices. She asked if I would ever reconsider in the future. I told her I do not revisit decisions once I have verified them thoroughly. That was 2 months ago. She has reached out a few times since. Apologies. Nostalgia. Reminders of good memories. I have responded politely but briefly. No reopening of the door. The wedding refunds have all been processed. The lease has been transferred fully to her. My life is structured again. I do not hate her. I do not think she is evil. I think she values status more than she realized. And I value being respected without having to negotiate for it. That difference was small on paper, but it was big enough to walk away from.